Your center has hosted a number of distinguished speakers, as Dr. Gray said, specifically addressing the issue of the large refugee and migrant populations that are moving through the African continent. And I know that those speakers and a number of you have paid particular attention to the severe challenges that refugees and other migrants face when they come to Morocco on their way to the Mediterranean, hoping to cross the Mediterranean to safety and a different life. And the death toll in that watery graveyard from 2014 to the start of this month has now risen to 4,863 men, women, and children. And overall, on a global level, there are now 65 million forcibly displaced people who have fled for their lives from their countries or who are displaced within their countries. This is the highest number of people who are in this desperate situation since the end of the Second World War. And behind the numbers here in this picture is just a partial satellite picture of the refugee camp I was just in. And these vast numbers of people are being driven from their homes at a time when we see a rising tide of hatred and extreme violence taking different forms throughout the world. And it is placing at risk the very idea of peaceful coexistence among peoples. And I stand here as a witness to that hatred and extreme violence. I've been on the border of Myanmar and Bangladesh. Now, two of Myanmar's largest neighbors are India to the west and China to the north and east, and it is also bordered by Thailand and Laos and Bangladesh. And these waters here are the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. Now, what we know today as Myanmar was previously called Burma. And that was under British colonial rule from 1885 to 1948. And it was called Burma because the largest ethnic group are called the Burmans. The Burmans. And after independence, as a rejection of its colonial past, the country's military government returned to the original Burman name for the country, which was Myanmar. Regardless of the name change, the largest proportion of the people in the country come from the ethnic group known as the Burmans. And the remaining 32% of the population comprises 135 different ethnic groups. And those are only the ones that are officially recognized by the government. There are also ethnic groups which are not officially recognized by the government. And those groups which are not acknowledged by the government include the Rohingya. But the Rohingya are not alone. This is a country with a lot of ethnic conflict. This is not a country at peace. There are many small armed groups in the country. They each have a flag, they have fighters, and they are holding out for independence and autonomy. And there may be anywhere from 25 to 49 of these armed groups. The numbers are constantly shifting, and even after 51 years of independence, no government in the country has been able to reach a comprehensive peace settlement. Now, you may be hoping that I'll be able to give you a comprehensive and satisfactory explanation for the events that I'm going to describe. There are many competing narratives about this country, and none fits all the available evidence. Some say that what I'm going to describe is a story of conflict born out of extreme poverty. Some say that this is a story of a conspiracy to exploit the country's oil and natural gas deposits. And others say that this is part of the defense of the traditional Burman and Buddhist religion, race, and nationality in the country. Now, all of those are factors in what has happened to the Rohingya. They live close to the coast and near the border with Bangladesh. It is rich in oil and gas deposits, but it's also one of the poorest areas of the country. And under successive military governments, and still today, the Rohingya have faced decades of discrimination. They've been forced into conditions which are almost identical to the apartheid system that you may be familiar with, to which blacks were subjected for so many years in South Africa. They have even been stripped of citizenship, despite the fact that they've lived in the country for many, many generations. And indeed, at many times, the Rohingya have left the country in large numbers, crossed the border, gone back again. But nothing prepared the world for what it began to see in August of last year. And they began escaping across the border to Bangladesh. Drone footage showed these incredible long lines of tens of thousands of people. It rapidly became a huge humanitarian emergency. And what was driving them out? Their villages were being burnt to the ground. Satellite images showed those villages before and then after they had been nearly completely obliterated. They struggled, fleeing for their lives. With nothing. No one was prepared for this. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people were flooding in, and the scale of this makeshift camp is virtually unimaginable.
Monks killed my husband. I arrived here yesterday night. I have 2 sons, but while we were crossing the border, I lost the younger one. I don't know where.
When the military started to kill the people in our village, we ran, but we didn't know there were going to be mines on the way. I was right behind my husband when it blew up. All I could think of was how I would cope with our 4 children now. I have nobody left in this world, and I don't know what to do. The one I loved is gone.
This is the camp where I was 2 weeks ago, meeting these people and recording evidence of what happened to them. This was particularly unbearable for me as a Buddhist. These people were fleeing from a majority Buddhist country. You heard the mother with her little son say that monks had killed her husband. And the desperate people we talked to said they were fleeing what they called the Buddhist Terror. Nothing could be further from the Buddha's teachings than this. Nothing. That's partly why it's so important for me to tell you this, but also for everyone, whatever faith you are or of no faith, because this is actually an assault on our common humanity, and it is crucial to wake up the conscience of the world about this. It's also important for so many of you to know this, because what is happening here is taking place against the backdrop of global Islamophobia. The monks and the military who are responsible for this humanitarian catastrophe say what they're doing is defending their race and their religion. If I start to tell you what happened, it will break your heart, said one of the Rohingya women to a United Nations investigator. Now, when I was there, I interviewed a doctor who was one of the first responders when the Rohingya began struggling through the mud, as you saw, from Myanmar to Bangladesh. And that doctor asked me not to identify him. So I'm using here a previously published photograph of another doctor, but I'm also going to tell you what he said. The first doctor I met said there were bullet wounds, shrapnel and landmine injuries, limbs chopped off with machetes. There were people bleeding to death as they walked, kept alive only by their will to live. There were children whose entire families had been killed. They had simply panicked and fled with everyone else who was escaping. There were hundreds and hundreds of women, he said, injured and traumatized by sexual assault. The little girl in this picture had her knee severely injured and required emergency treatment once she crossed the border. And her family told this doctor that she had been deliberately shot in the lower body by police as she and her family were trying to struggle across the border. Now, the scale of this catastrophe is hard to imagine. No one in the camp knows exactly how many people are there. Probably up to 1 million, and more people arrive every day. It is the largest refugee complex in the world today. It is double the size of the next nearest refugee camp in size, which is in Uganda. Now, 6 months ago, the United Nations said there were 14,000 children in the camp who had lost one or both of their parents. A month later, the Bangladesh government said that number had risen to more than 36,000. By the beginning of this year, the United Nations Children's Agency said there were more than 250,000 Rohingya children living in the overcrowded camps and informal settlements on the Bangladesh border. It is now estimated that 60% of that quarter of 1 million children have lost their mother, their father, or both. And that is 150,000 children. What are they carrying with them? Well, their drawings tell the story. Their villages were set on fire. Their people were shot in cold blood. There were helicopter gunships. There were people strung up in the trees. And there were babies thrown into the flames. Now, as you can tell, this is very difficult for me. And I bet it's difficult for all of us. And this is why I appreciate so much that you're here. Because in a certain way, the fact that we're all here with all of our beating hearts, in a way makes it easier for each of us. Now, I want you to know that I am going to be coming to what we can do about this and what we can do to help the huge numbers of people in these camps. But if you don't mind, I would like to have us take a pause. This is a lot to take in, so however you want to do this, I would just like to stand here, just be silent for a minute, and not so much think about what I've seen, but connect with my feelings. My heart is pounding. Perhaps yours is too. And what I know from my experience in the world of mindfulness is if we actually connect with the distress that we're feeling, we actually can work with that in a more healthy way and keep our minds open to what's going on. So I just invite you, it's a little experiment, just try that, let's be here together for 1 minute and just feel how actually this feels. Before I go further, I'm going to pause. If anyone needs to leave for any reason, this is a moment you can do that. And also, if there's a question, you have a burning question, right? You want to stop talking and let me ask my question. I'm going to take a pause right here and see if there's any burning question anyone has.
So we're Amnesty International, and we have petitions for the case of Rohingya here. And guys, please sign it so that we could help the people that Dr. Richard just talked about.
Okay, thank you very much. And so at the end, when people are leaving, they can do that?
Yeah,
thank you very
absolutely.
Much.
Yeah, if you would love to.
Okay. Any other questions or anything anyone wants to say just at this point? We're having a little pause.
My question is about U.S. relations with Myanmar.
Which relations?
U.S. relations with Myanmar.
Between the United States and Myanmar? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if they've been affected.
Yes.
To what degree?
The United States... thank you. The United States has been historically a very strong economic and military supporter of successive governments in Myanmar. It did lead a very strong campaign of sanctions a number of years ago, part of which is credited with the change of government to the current government. And now that this has started, the U.S. administration has played a very strong role in criticizing the the Myanmar military in suspending any further arms assistance, and there is legislation currently going through the U.S. Congress and Senate on this issue. And I think that the point here is that a lot more like that will be needed if there's to be a significant change, and we could talk more about it. Excellent question. Any other question before I continue? Yes, over here.
In your talk right now, you talked about monks killing husbands and children, and also police. I'm just curious about the relationship between the Buddhists and police and any military organization in.
Myanmar is one of the 8 countries in the world where the majority of the population are Buddhist. So you'll be familiar with the notion, sometimes people say people are born into a religion, so they're like culturally part of that religion. But nonetheless, they would, if you ask them, and when there's a census taken about nationality and religion, the majority of the population, which tends to be the Burman part of the population, describe themselves as Buddhists. So, as in a majority Christian or a Muslim or a Jewish country, the majority of the military, the majority of the police and security forces are people who would describe themselves as Buddhists. And as I will show you in this next section, formal monks who are like the preachers of the Buddhist world have fanned, I'm very sorry to say, the flames of hatred that have led to this.